Hi students, we're on to chapter 4 in our consumer behavior class. This is all about learning and memory. Again, a very interesting chapter that many of you can relate to. And again, we're putting concepts, definitions to concepts, a lot of which you already know, but now this will be defined and related back to marketing. So how do we learn? We learn a lot of ways, through experiences and through observation. Right now we're learning in a class, but I ask you to do some field exercises because I want you to observe the world around you and learn that way. A lot of you have experiences, say, with internships, and you learn a lot through those kinds of things. So, and then bring it back to the classroom, and your work in the classroom gets so much easier because you have a variety of ways that we're learning. So there's incidental learning, and this is kind of casual and unintentional knowledge that we pick up along the way. It's kind of like something that happens in, the background, I should say. So like that's why product jingles are so popular, because you can hear a jingle or even an audio mark and immediately you think of State Farm, or you think of McDonald's, or you think of, uh, you know, um, whoever it is that, has a jingle that you hear on the radio or TV. So learning is an ongoing process. We're constantly being updated as we are exposed to more and more stimuli every day. So there's all kinds of theories of learning, and psychologists study this learning process, and then marketers study it as well, so that we understand how we can educate people on our products or services so that they understand it, they purchase it, and become loyal customers. So behavioral learning theories assume that learning takes place as the result of responses to external events. So feedback we receive as we go through life shapes our experiences. I think we can definitely all agree with that. Certainly an example that's happening right now is coronavirus. This will shape you and the rest of your life. And hopefully, as we talk about this in our final paper, we've changed for the better. We've changed our habits. We use our time differently. We use e-commerce differently. We're consuming differently. So it does shape our experiences, and this is a biggie. We understand that actions we take can result in rewards and punishments. So we learn this at a very early age, that if we do something wrong, we get punished for it. That comes in a lot of different ways. It could be a bad grade. It could be, told to sit in the corner and time out so our behavior is better. So there's a thing called classical conditioning, and it occurs when a stimulus that elicits a response is paired with another stimulus that initially does not elicit a response on its own. So let's get into exactly what we mean by that so that you have more of a visual. So you've all probably heard of Pavlov's dog. Okay, this is an example of classical conditioning. When pairing a neutral stimulus, which would be a bell, with a stimulus known to cause the dog to salivate, which is food. So we know when we ring the bell, the dog knows to come over and the food is there. And they know that that's the reward, so to speak. That's classical conditioning. So what then happens down the road, which I'll talk about on the next slide, is that sometimes now they get so conditioned, all they need to do now is just see the bell to know that their food is coming. Instrumental conditioning, on the other hand, is a person learns to perform behaviors that produce positive outcomes and avoid things that avoid negative outcomes. Because there's consequences. Now, I have a picture here on the right-hand side, and this is like, just kind of a picture to reinforce what we're talking about. But years ago in school, if you didn't get the answer right, you had to sit with a dunce cap on, which is totally ridiculous and terrible. But no one wanted that to happen to them, and they So to avoid that, they studied and got the right answers. So that's an example of, trying to avoid something because you're going to get a negative consequence from it. And on the other side, oh, I'm going to get a reward. So if I study and get the right answers, I know I'm going to get a reward, a ribbon, whatever that reward looks like. Okay, so classical conditioning, some of the components of it. Unconditioned stimulus, which is, beef powder or dog food. The conditioned stimulus, which is the bell. Conditioned response. Sound of the bell equals feeding time, or the dog salivates. Dogs associate the bell with food even without it being there. Okay? So if you might still show the bell and they might be looking around for looking for food because it's an association. Conditioning issues, repetition, pairing stimuli over and over again. And this goes for humans as well, by the way, not just animals. Stimulus generalization is when we jump to the conclusion that the response is always going to be the same. Okay, stimulus. Stimulus generalization is called a halo effect. Me Too products, which are usually like off-brand or private label, they piggyback on the success of a product by using maybe the same shape, packaging, or colors. They do this a lot, at the grocery stores with their store brand. Stimulus discrimination, if the Me Too product is not good, it can affect the original product. In other words, I had a bad experience with that. Maybe the actual one isn't really that good. Classical conditioning principles, positive associations in the consumer's mind about the product or service. So brand equity is a strong positive association in a consumer's memory which commands loyalty from the consumer. So that's what we always want. We want them to have positive associations with the product or service so that they become loyal customers over and over again. And that could be from things like the product tastes great, it's good pricing, maybe there's a sale, it pairs well with something else, it's good in different kinds of recipes, it can be used in a lot of different ways, something like that. Okay, so we do have learned associations with brands, and then we generalize them to other products. So I have Tide dry cleaners here as an example. So if you grew up using Tide as the detergent, your mom bought it, now you bought it, you like the smell, it works well, etc. Now here is a product or a service, a dry cleaner called Tide Dry Cleaners associated with the brand. So automatically, because you're loyal to one brand, you associate positively that this brand will also be as good a quality because of your experiences. See how that works there? So marketing applications of repetition. So we know that repetition increases our learning, whether it's, repetitive definitions or multiplication or something from when we were younger in school. Now think of it in terms of marketing. Okay, the more exposure we get, the more we're aware of the product. And exposure happens in a lot of ways. That's called integrated marketing communication. You could get something on Instagram, then you could hear a radio ad, then you could see something in print, then you could see, it on the side of a bus. You could be at the beach and see a plane going by with the information and the message on the plane. There's a lot of different ways for repetition to happen. Okay, when exposure decreases, sometimes we forget about the product. This does happen. It's called extinction. Okay, however, too much exposure can lead to advertising wear out. I'm sure we can all think of products that were in our face over and over and over again, and then people just got sick of them. It wasn't a novelty anymore. It wasn't cool. So here's an example from many years ago, but Izod Lacoste, the crocodile, I always thought it was an alligator, on your clothes appeared everywhere. And it lost its cool factor and that elite factor. And what happened was it got bought out and they repositioned it, and they're still in the rebuilding stages, so that it's not so easy to find this reptile, we'll call it, on anything, okay, without paying a premium price. But that's a great example of something that was everywhere, and then, you know, it lost its elite status. Marketing applications of stimulus generalization. Okay, here's some more applications of understanding the concept. Stimulus generalization, tendency for stimuli similar to conditioned stimulus to evoke similar unconditioned responses. So marketers absolutely capitalize on this positive association. So here are some examples. In the world of consumer packaged goods, or CPG, family branding is something that holds a lot of weight. So for instance, if you have a positive corporate image, it can trickle down to all of your products. So for instance, SC Johnson, the family-owned company, all of their products are under one banner, and there's a positive association. Purdue Chicken is another example. So if they put out chicken nuggets or a whole chicken, we feel connected to that brand and have a positive image because we've had a good experience with one. So therefore, it's probably high quality in another area. Line extensions are another big area. Here's an example. The picture here on the right is a coffee shop in New York called Ralph's Coffee. And it is a line extension of Ralph Lauren, the designer, fashion designer. So he thought he could go off into the coffee business because he had such a great following and loyalty and quality brand equity that this could also be something positive. There's licensing. So an example here is Bentley cologne. So we all know what a Bentley is, a very expensive, high-end car. Well, what if they had a cologne as well? Would you associate that elite status of someone who owns a Bentley to the cologne? Not sure if it's a successful product or not. And then finally, lookalike packaging, otherwise known as, I said, off-brand or private label. Sometimes that association automatically, you know, if it looks like the other brand, probably tastes like the other brand. And quite frankly, a lot of times it does. And I'll show you some pictures of that in a second. So for your field exercise, you had to find an example of an ad that uses nostalgic appeal. And how do they connect with their audience? And do you think this is an effective strategy for advertisers? So all of you are working on that right now. Digging around, finding some interesting examples of that, and you are including a picture of the ad or a link to the ad. So the marketing power of nostalgia. Okay, marketers may resurrect popular characters to evoke fond memories of the past. So I saw one student already had Cookie Monster, for example. We all love Sesame Street. It brings back good memories. Well, now if they're using Sesame Street, I'm going to watch the commercial a little bit closer because I love Cookie Monster. Retro brands over here on the right, Fossil uses kind of that retro look to sell their products. It's kind of cool, vintage. Recently, Lizzo just came out with ad. She's singing All Together Now by the Beatles, and it's a Facebook ad for kind of like a chat room for Facebook. I mean, this literally just came out yesterday. The interesting thing is that you take Lizzo, who's popular right now, and she's modern, and you have a certain age group that knows who she is. You have the Beatles, who are classic, and you merge those two ideas together for Facebook, and very powerful. You're going to get a lot of different age groups to look at this ad because they can relate to it on many levels. That's what nostalgia does for marketing. Okay, so what retro brands are targeted to you? Were these brands that were once used by your parents? So my great example here is Old Spice, Smell Like a Man. Well, sure, that's what you know on the right-hand side, this built guy that's fashionable and funny and on a white horse on the sand. And then on the left-hand side, this is the ad I remember. My dad used Old Spice, okay? So that to me is clearly an old man's cologne and smell. I love that smell. It's very nostalgic for me. But for all of you, you may not remember that brand on the left and only remember the brand on the right. So to me, Old Spice is a great brand that rebranded itself and modernized itself for the modern times. I have 2 videos here I want you to check out on YouTube as we're talking about nostalgia. Seems like the Beatles always make it into these commercials because they're classic, and if you don't like the Beatles, there's something wrong with you. My husband's a huge fan and I'm a big fan, but I want you to look at these 2 ads. One's for Nike, it's a little bit older, and it's Karma's Gonna Get Ya, I believe it's called, and then the Volkswagen Beetle Bug car did an ad recently that it's done in cartoon, it has all these famous people in it, and then they also overlay the Beatles' Let It Be. So I mean, that commercial altogether is just like you want to watch it over and over again. So here, these are fine examples of how companies are using nostalgia to bring in several kinds of audiences. Okay, so how does instrumental conditioning occur? Instrumental conditioning occurs when we learn to perform behaviors that produce positive outcomes, okay? And we avoid those that yield negative ones. So you may receive a reward after a positive behavior. We're probably going to do it again. Okay, positive reinforcement is compliments that we get maybe. So maybe if we wear a certain perfume or we wear a certain shirt or shoes, someone compliments us. Guess what? I'm going to wear that perfume a lot, or I'm going to get that shirt in every color. You know, I think we've all been there. Negative reinforcement can strengthen responses to behave appropriately. So Axe is a great example. Their ads show the before, someone that doesn't use their product, and what they look like after. A lot of teeth whitening ads do this too, to make us see like, oh, your teeth are yellow, and look, they're white. And then when they're white, you know, you're more successful and you look better. Punishment changes our behavior. For an example of this would be like, I think it's the Downy commercials now that they show a wrinkled shirt. And if you actually use fabric softener, then your shirt wouldn't look wrinkled, and then people wouldn't jump to conclusions that maybe you were doing something you shouldn't have done. So you can see how these psychological behaviors are used in marketing. And then I want you to take a look at this graph. It could kind of help you understand the different ways that we behave, positively or negatively, and the different reinforcements that we get. Okay, how can marketers use reinforcement? Fixed interval reinforcement. An example of this is at like the last day of a seasonal sale, the store is crowded, and you may not go back until the next sale. Variable interval reinforcement, not sure when the reinforcement will happen, so consistently responding just in case. So that's when a company may have secret shoppers out there, making sure that everybody is using the right type of customer service, and the store is organized and cleaned and welcoming. Fixed ratio reinforcement. Reinforcement happens after a fixed number of responses. So this is maybe, you know, loyalty points for like Chick-fil-A or Starbucks. You know, we keep going back because we know we're getting close to, you know, a free sandwich. Variable ration Reinforcement, this happens at a certain number of responses, but you don't know how many. So an example of this is slot machines. So um, I have these people winning. Hopefully, I believe casinos are opening up 25% capacity, and we'll see what happens with them. Okay, frequency marketing. Okay, popular technique to reward customers for regular purchases. So this whole idea came out of the airline industry and their frequent flyer programs, and everyone kind of jumped on, whether it be grocery stores with loyalty programs or coffee shops like Dunkin' or Chick-fil-A. A lot of people have loyalty programs for points. People like them. We like to get something that we didn't necessarily pay for indirectly. We like to be rewarded. Other kinds of reward programs come in the way of, like, if we reduce energy consumption or we lose weight, employee performance, recycling. So a lot of workplaces might have a reward system set up if you're eating healthy or you're losing weight, or recycling properly, and they get so many rewards to kind of get people incentivized. So during this pandemic, have you been rewarded lately from a company that you are loyal to? Think about that. And if so, were you happy with that? So we learned about products by observing others. We kind of talked a little bit about that in the beginning of this deck. So we get our attention. The consumer focuses on models of behavior. Okay, the consumer retains this behavior in our memory. And think about an ad when you watch someone demonstrate a product. Okay, we're watching someone demonstrate a product, whether it be maybe a beauty product or maybe an air fryer, since that's the latest and greatest. Production processes. The consumer has the ability to perform the behavior. Motivation, a situation arises where the behavior is useful to the consumer. And then observational learning, the consumer acquires and performs the behavior earlier demonstrated by the model. So maybe there's an air fryer that you see on an ad and they're demonstrating it. And we remember that, oh, it looked really easy to make, salmon. So now I'm going to purchase this, and now I can try this at home. And I have a really nice meal that, didn't end up being fried in butter. And now I've actually demonstrated what I recently saw on the commercial. Cognitive learning theory. We learn about products by observing others' behavior. So observational learning, we watch others' actions and we note their reinforcements they received. We're vicariously learning through other people, usually our parents and their purchasing habits, or friends and family. Social default and modeling, we're mimicking or imitating others' behavior. Now, this isn't always a positive thing. So I think in terms of children watching maybe violent videos or movies, and then they're imitating what they see on the TV shows, whether it's, an attitude that they have or language that they use or products now that they want because they saw someone on a show using this, otherwise known as Disney. Okay, so how do we learn to be consumers? So, from birth practically, we become consumers. It's kind of scary. It's called consumer socialization, and it's a process by which young people acquire skills, knowledge, and attitudes relevant to their functioning in the marketplace. And I have this little girl over here who's probably watching mom in a beauty routine of what product she uses on her hair, what does she use to maybe beautify herself, her skincare routine. And parents definitely influence us, hopefully positively, but I'm not naive either. Okay, so there's different ways that our parents can influence us. They can be very restrictive and don't allow us to do a lot. That's called authoritarian. They could not care, and that's called neglecting. And then less restrictive could be indulgent in their direct or indirect way of influencing us. So I find that this is an interesting chart, 5 stages of consumer development. So in stage 1, notice on the left is what's happening, the stages, but on the right are the ages. Starting at 0 to 1, we're already observing as a child, okay? Accompanying a parent maybe at a grocery store or at a mall. And then we start even making requests as young as, 1, 2 years old, all the way up to like 3 years old. And then we actually make selections, which is the reason they put sugary cereals at the bottom of the shelf so that the little ones can see, the sugary cereals. Making selections for things up to age 4, making assisted purchases almost up to age 6, and making independent purchases at 8. They know brand names. They're influenced by TV, by social media, by friends, family, parents. So a consumer is born very early. 80% of children ages 5 and under use the internet at least once a week. So think about that. A lot of parents use that electronic devices as babysitters. You may see them in strollers with a device in front of them. Personally, I think it's terrible. I get it that, you can't always give your baby full attention, but I just think screen time like that early on can be a little dangerous. Using online content and TV at the same time is already happening. Prime time for advertisers to push their products and begin lifelong purchasing habits. So they're already pushing out to the parents and the child. And the thing is that children do not know how to think like adults, so they can't quite, get their head around something that doesn't really work the way they may see it on TV. So this can be a problem. So this is things called cognitive development. So if you're 6 and younger, you don't have the ability to store or retrieve information typically. But ages 6 through 12, we can be cued and prompted with something such as an ad. And then for 12 and above, it's more strategic. We store information and retrieve information as needed. So knowing this information, there are ethical issues to advertising that have been put into place. So because under 6 years old, they don't understand the persuasive intent of an ad, a law was put into place by the Federal Trade Commission in 1970 that protects children from limiting content during children's programming. So years ago, we watched children's shows in the mornings, and that's when all the kids watch cartoons, and they started limiting in the 70s how many cereal companies or fast food companies or toy companies could be inundating these kids. And they gave them a limited time where they could advertise. So, interesting. Okay, for reflection. Think about how your parents influenced your development as a consumer and how much freedom you were provided in terms of your consumer choices. So, were they authoritarian, where they were very restrictive, or were they more like, we'll get a treat here and there and allow you to do a little bit more? I think all kids have their own stories. I thought I was pretty good with the choices for my kids, but, as they're growing older, they're blaming me for things like, you never had candy in the house, or you never had sugar cereals. I'm like, well, that's probably for a good reason. Okay, so moving on. Okay, memory, a process of acquiring information and storing it over time so that it'll be available when we need it. That's our memory. So encoding stage is when information enters our memory. And then storage stage is we warehouse information until we need it. Retrieval is we access information when we need it. If we're making a decision about a product, we can kind of go back in our mind and say, oh, what brands or what products would satisfy my want or need. And episodic memories are events that are personally relevant. So different things have happened in our life, and certainly coronavirus and this great pause and COVID-19 will forever be seared in your mind. And that's where we get to that changing our habits, doing things differently. How is our consumer behavior changed due to this forever memory? Narrative is a story about a product. This is called storytelling as well. Many companies use this approach to kind of attract customers and let them know that they're authentic and they started somewhere grassroots and ended up, as a product that you may want to purchase it because it's family owned or it has a great story behind it. Okay. Memory systems. Sensory memory stores information we receive from our senses. So you can kind of go through this chart talking everything about short-term memory and long-term memory. Things stick with us for a long time, and then some things just come and go. For an advertiser, they want you to be able to retrieve information from an ad, that when you're ready to have a want or need, you think about their brand. And so it's hard to stick in someone's memory like that. So what's the memory that you just can't seem to forget related to a brand? Think about that. I like to stop you in the chapters and make you think of how, your regular consumer behavior, how does it relate back to the chapters? So associative network. This is an interesting concept. Other products we associate with an individual product might influence how we remember it. So they give the example here, and they call it a spider web because it kind of goes out all over. So perfumes, they have it up the top, okay, and you might have this first association might be floral scents and colognes, and then you might dip down a little further and like relate it to an actual brand like Chanel or Calvin Klein or white linen. And then you might even go down further and remember that it was something that was very like high end or rich or had like a beautiful like sexy smell. And then it goes down further and how it relates to something. So there's all these associations we make with products. It could be related back to a person that used the product. This happens often. So spreading activation, shifting back and forth among levels of meaning, okay? So spreading activation, I'm going to go through an example of what this spider web could look like. So for example, you have Axe men's fragrances, okay? Deodorants, etc. So brand specific, we have a memory of this specific brand due to the claims that it's kind of macho and has like a sexy male. The ad specific memory of the content of the ad itself is this guy, he's using the product, this handsome guy. Brand identification, our memory is stored that the brand name is Axe. The product category, how it works and how it should be used. So they show that there's a bottle sitting in the guy's medicine cabinet and he grabs it and sprays it on, okay? And then evaluative reactions, the memory stores a positive or negative feeling about the product. And, if the guy's good looking, looks cool, all these women are attracted to him, we're going to have a positive sense. So believe it or not, we do this with products all the time, but it works so quickly in our mind, this like activation. Some of it's just habitual. And as I said before in the last slide, sometimes it may be related to something that's in our memory, deep-seated long-term memory. Okay, retrieving memories. So pioneering brands, which is the first in the marketplace, make it easier for us to recall them. So if we think of the first potato chip that was not in a bag, that didn't break up, that was easy to bring to the beach, that didn't keep our hands greasy, that came in really great flavors, we're probably going to think of Pringles. Okay, that's already in our memory. They were the first ones with this cool packaging, and we can retrieve that information pretty quickly. that is called a pioneering brand. Follower brands are like the second one in line, which is the example here of Stacks. We're not gonna, that's not what's gonna come to our mind right away. They look alike. There's a lot of things that are similar. Maybe the ingredients has changed up slightly. I think one is gluten-free and the other one isn't. Then you have private label that gets in there, and that's like the store brand. It looks exactly the same, just with the lower price. And I've actually done a taste test on all these, and the store brand is just as good. Okay, we're almost done this chapter, but the nature of the ad itself can cause us to remember it more easily. The use of audio components, pop-ups, scents, different things. And we know when something's funny or they use video or nostalgia, we're going to remember the ad much better. Okay, so the last slide here is, in marketing research, measuring memory for marketing stimuli can be a little difficult because recognition, I recognize the brand versus I recall the brand, they're two different things. When we go to look for something at the store, whether it's a beauty product or a food product, a food marketer or a manufacturer wants us to recall the actual brand name. Okay, like I just don't need mayonnaise, I need Hellmann's mayonnaise. But in the problem of doing marketing research and measuring ads and recall if someone remembers it, there's definitely biases in answers in marketing research where people just mark down yes for everything, or they just can't remember it, like, oh, it was a funny ad, but I just don't remember the actual product. So you don't want to be that company. You want to be able to have a mix of recognition in there, whether I said before, like it's nostalgia, something to remember. Not only the product, but the brand name is really important. So I will see you next on chapter 5. In the meantime, continue to get your field exercises done, work in your groups. You need to make an appointment with me sooner than later to discuss your final paper. And I look forward to hearing from you. Simply email me and get an appointment. It does not need to be during my office hours. You can simply give me a couple of dates and a couple of times that work for your group. So I'll see you guys in chapter 5.